Hello, everybody. Welcome out to another episode of Tax Sale Titans. I'm Shade Frey here with Steven Swenson. This is episode number 34 of the We're happy to be with you tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. We enjoy doing this weekly training, so we want to welcome everyone out there that's joining us live, and anyone that may listen to it on the replay. As far as what we're going to talk about tonight, we're trying to pick out some different states that we haven't talked about before. So we're going to be talking about North Dakota. We're going to be looking at their tax deed auctions and some sold property. Then we're going to talk about the three biggest risks associated with tax deed investing. And then we're going to go talk about Massachusetts and how their auctions work as well.
Yeah, we'll wrap it all up there with questions, Q&A from members or anybody attending on the call. And with that being said, we also just want to give a special shout out thanks to all of our coaching members, all the program members, the YouTube members, subscribers. I mean, anybody that if you're watching this, we appreciate your time. We're happy to have you with us, and we're hoping that we can show you things maybe that you haven't seen before or teach you something new.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's such a good time to be involved in tax sale investing, and so we want to thank all of you that are using us or going to us to learn more about it. So, like we talked about, we're going to talk about North Dakota, look at some North Dakota properties. In fact, I was actually, as I was going through and looking at some of the sold results, I was completely shocked by what great deals can be picked up within this state.
Yeah, in fact, let's talk a little bit about North Dakota. So North Dakota is classified as a tax deed state, meaning that the counties conduct yearly tax sales that basically where they're able to foreclose on properties after a redemption period has expired there. So the county auditor will issue a tax deed to the county on all properties that are 3 years delinquent on the third Tuesday of November. So they've got a very straightforward system for when properties end up getting foreclosed on. The minimum, the opening bid amount consists of all the penalties and fees, recording costs, everything that is in publication costs are wrapped up into that over that 3 year period of time.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and they hold all of their auctions there in November. That's the reason why we're going to be looking at the 2025 sales, and it's part of the reason why we're talking about them now, is because those auctions are going to be coming up here in November, and so this could be a good opportunity if you live within that area, or it might even make sense to travel there and bid on some properties. So they're going to use premium bidding method, which means that they start at the back taxes and they're going to bid up in price until whoever wins is the high bidder and they win the property. Now, as far as North Dakota, they don't have online auctions yet. They're all held on site, which means that you need to be there in person, but they do offer over the counters if they're available. They call them private sales. So between when the auction took place and the next auction, if there's over the counter properties that are still available, you can actually purchase these by doing a private offer. In fact, we'll even show you a list of some properties that are over the counter right now.
Yeah, so we're gonna jump over right now and let's see here.
There we go. So here's the first county that we're going to look at. This is Williams County, Nebraska. We're looking at their last year auction information. And as we go down here, we can see that they had three properties listed here. And so this first one here, we can see that it opened up for 6,400 and ended up selling for 45,000. Now here is the property itself. We can see that this is from September 2025, so almost at the time of auction. Now, one thing I do notice, and we don't see any cars here, maybe somebody's gone, but we do see some garbage cans, and it does look like it's being mowed and cared for. So some of the home does need some work, obviously, could use some paint, but overall looks to be, decent little neighborhood. And here we can look into the county record information as well. So we can see the county's valuing at about $151,000. You can see it's on 0.16th of an acre. And here we can
Yeah,
see that tax sale right here.
yeah. I mean, the price sale at 45,000. I mean, it sold for less than a third of value. Which leaves plenty of room to fix it up or make it just a pretty cheap acquisition for something they could rent out for a fair amount.
Yeah, well, and what market value and the county value, it even shows it that it was a better deal. So as we look here into the estimate, we can see the estimate, they're estimating about 272,000. Their range is between 223 to 319, and it rents out for about $1,700 a month.
Yeah, that's way more. What makes it the better? I mean, they paid way less than a third of value if it's anywhere around, that 200 plus $1,000 range here, then they didn't pay very much.
Yeah, well, and then kind of looking at the comps, we don't have any information right here as far as when it was built and the size, but we can go back to the county record information and we can find out it was built in, 1925. We can see it's, almost 1,300 square feet. And, we can kind of see some of the outlines here as well of what the property looks like and get an idea of the map. But, here's a property that closed. This is about the same size, just a little smaller. For 279, it closed in June, so just a couple of months ago. And we can see that this one's about 10 years older. So, probably a pretty good comparable property. Now, obviously, they've rehabbed and cleaned up the inside, but you can see from the outside, it's still just kind of a small little home. And, they sold it for 279,000. So if we're looking at this property and let's say that they bought it for 44,000, even if they put in, $60,000 in getting a new roof and paint, there's still $170,000 worth of potential profits. So even if they put in $100,000, they would have close to $140,000 in potential profit off of this deal.
Yeah, that is a pretty good comp too, especially for one that's been through some repair. It gives us some kind of an idea that if we were to fix up this property, we could probably get that kind of a price point out of it.
Yeah, here's another one that was right next to it. This one's, quite a bit smaller, only 846 square feet, and it's still closed for 230,000. And so you can see that, there's obviously been some upgrades done, but this one's even smaller and, still selling for over $200,000. So even as is, I think you could sell this property, for 150,000 probably pretty quickly as is. You decide to go ahead and rehab it. I mean, I think they could have made 100,000 just selling it as is. And if they
Yeah.
rehabbed it, they could make between 100 and 180,000 depending on how much the rehab cost.
Yeah, it's a tremendous amount of profit potential for a rehab of this price range.
Yeah. This next one here was a little bit interesting because you can see where it said action pending. So I was kind of wondering what that meant, but we were able to look in the sales record and find out what it actually ended up selling for. So it opened up at 4,600. This little house right here, it does have the two-car garage. You can kind of see where it's located here. And their value get $170,000. You can see it was built in 1954, so it is a little bit newer than the last one. And it ended up selling for 18,000. Now, what I'm kind of wondering is because you can see the date here wasn't until a couple of months later. I'm almost wondering if this property was picked up over the counter, or maybe it took
Yeah.
a while, for it to close. I'm not quite sure, but either way, you can see that it did get sold by the county, from the county to this buyer for $18,000. Of course, they used a quick claim deed.
Yeah, it's
And
interesting. For them to come to that amount, it almost would have had to have been, something that they either worked out with the buyer that bid at the auction, or maybe they had to try to ask somebody that bid the second highest bid or something like that for it to sell later on like that and for a higher price. Because you would think it was bought over the counter, but it wasn't bought over the counter. It was still bought with with an auction price point of 18,000.
well, and I don't know if they sent in an offer or that's how it worked after. And I didn't think about that. It very well could have been that, let's say the first bidder bid 20,000, and then the next bidder had a bid of 18,000 or whatever, and the first bidder didn't end up paying or couldn't come up with the money, and then they went ahead and hit up the second bidder who ended up acquiring it for 18,000. So we don't quite know what happened. It looks like it sold at the auction. Maybe it happened after the auction because you can see the action pending there. But either way, they've got this for 18 grand. The county's valuing it at 170 grand. We kind of see the same thing here, but what's kind of interesting is they've actually just listed this for sale pretty recently. They're selling it as is, as a kind of a tax deed, quick claim deed property. It's been on the market for 94 days. Uh, so we can see here where they originally listed it, for
Oh,
$99,000.
yeah, yeah. Right now, that's what they're trying to do right now, is to see if they can just do a quick flip on it as is without doing anything to the property and pull some cash out of it.
Yeah, yeah, and they're motivated to sell as well because you can see here. I mean, I think that this property is probably valued close to similar to the other one, between
Hmm.
250 to 320. Maybe even a little bit more than that, kind of looking at the comps, but they're trying to sell it as is. You can see being sold as is, uh, you know, and so I mean, you look at it, they paid 18,000 for it. They sell it for 69,000. They're still making 50 grand off of it.
Yeah, yeah. That's probably their objective there, is to just get more working capital so that they can reinvest into something else here and move on. It's a good property. It's a pretty good property at that price point. I mean, there's a ton of profitability in it. It's pretty well usable like it is almost.
Yeah, and I think that they may have cleared out some of it. I don't even think they cleared out all of it. I You can see some of the stuff still down here, the beds and stuff. So I think they just kind of opened it up. They changed the locks, and they're selling it, kind of as is. I don't think they put a whole lot of money into this other than just getting it. Otherwise you'd take all of this stuff out, the furniture, the beds, the stuff like that. So I think it was kind of a property that had already been cleared out except for a few things. They just picked it up and they're just trying to sell it as is and make 50 grand off of it.
Yeah, it's a pretty good deal at that, even at that price point right now. It's a pretty good deal.
Yeah. So the last property here is just this little lot. We can see that it opened up for just over $100, ended up selling for $1,000. And it's this kind of lot right here over to the left-hand side. We can look at the county record information. See, it's this lot right here. And, I'm not quite sure exactly what it's worth. Here's a lot that sold, and it's kind of outside of the county a little bit. I mean, if we were to look here at the map, it wasn't in the big area that we were at before. So I almost kind of think that it was, one of the locals or somewhere. It wasn't there within the big city that may have been interested in it. But, this one sold for 15 grand. This one sold for 10 grand. So I think, they probably picked it up for less than 10 cents on the dollar.
Yeah, that's not bad. That's interesting. I mean, it's interesting that all three of those properties, are decent deals.
Yeah, now we're going to look here at the Ward County list. So right here is the list from 2025. And in fact, we're going to look here in a minute at this list as well. You can see that's there over the counter that are currently available for sale. So those are through the private sales. And the first one that I looked at was just kind of this one. So we just see what it opened up at. We don't have the sales price, but we can always go back into the county record information and see if we can figure that out. So we see the home right here.
Yeah, that doesn't look too bad.
and we can see it sold for $3,374. So what did it open up?
Yeah, that's close. Yeah, that
3,073.
basically sold for the opening bid amount.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe a dollar more. I don't know.
Yeah.
But kind of see where it's located here on the GIS map. We can see kind of the frame. We can see it was built, it's quite a bit older, built in 1840. Let's go ahead and take a look at it. You can also see the address, the mailing address, and the property address are different, but that makes sense because this was probably purchased by a local investor. Oh, did this to me before, but I found it. Oh, it's in Kenmore. That's right.
There it is. So September of 2024 image.
Yeah. Well,
You've got vinyl windows on it and a new roof and
yep, new siding, new roof, vinyl windows. So this is from 2024. So, really in pretty good shape for a $3,500 property.
yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
we might have to make a trip out to North Dakota.
Yeah, that's a pretty crazy opportunity there.
Let's see if it might have pulled up on Zillow. No, it didn't. But we can kind of see the comparables there. Let me see what the county's valued at about 50,000. And I think that it's probably worth, when I was kind of looking at some of the comparables here in town, you can kind of see, let's even go to the lowest. Let's filter out to homes. Cheapest 79, 115, 139. So probably valued between 70 to 80, 70,000 to 120,000 would be my guess, but we'd do some more research on it for sure. But either way, for $3,500, based on what we can see here.
The fact that it's sold the fact these are selling for low amounts and close to opening bid amounts tells us a lot about the competition that's there, on site of the sale. And it's not enough that people are willing to bid up prices high and on each other. They're pretty much getting properties at close to opening bids, which means that probably just enough people there to bid on the properties. And even then, they probably still have some stuff that'll end up going over the counter.
Yeah, there was a couple that I think ended up, getting a little competition, but there was most of the ones that I looked at. I almost wonder if it's this house right there. The roof doesn't look too bad, and it doesn't look like it has a front door though, does it? I don't know if that's
No,
it or if you go around the back side and you enter it from the other side.
yeah, it is kind of a weird house where the front looks like the back.
Let's see, it's 2 bedroom, 2 bath, 1,300 square feet. God, look, that rent can't be right. Seems huge. $2,200 a month. Some of those areas in North Dakota have a bunch of um, people working there for oil and stuff. That maybe rent is a little bit higher.
Well, what's interesting is just that these are all on-site auctions. So if you live in the area or if you're close enough to the area, then these are auctions that would be worth attending. to bid on some of these just because the prices are not too bad. And some of the counties in this county had quite a few properties that were available in this auction.
Yeah, it looks like it's a pretty strong market. The homes are selling median within this zip code at 190,000.
Yeah, those are good numbers for a tax sale market, and that's a pretty good sized list as well.
Yeah, and this one, I think if we looked at it, sold for like 4,100 or so.
There's something there that sold for 88,000, or at least
It was opening bid. It's a piece of land. We can look at it here in a second. Just another home that was picked up there for on about $5,000 or so. This one here didn't end up selling. I don't believe it did anyway.
yeah, probably. I mean, because I guess because of the high opening bid.
I, I
80.
I'm not sure, but you can see it's this big piece of land right here.
Oh, it's next to a school district. Is that a school that's next to, or what
I
is
don't
it?
know if I think I'm not sure
Or
if it
maybe it's
was.
commercial. It kind of looks commercial.
Yeah, I think it was commercial. We can see in 2025 they valued it at 430,000. It's
Well,
three
why do they
point.
value? Did the value go down here that
Yeah,
much?
yeah. Well, and that might be the fact that it had been through the tax sale, or some the new owner could have said, "Hey, you're overcharging me. This is way too much." There's reasons why it could be other than it actually going down in actual value.
Yeah, it seems like a pretty valuable piece of real estate, though.
Yeah. Back to see it's general commercial. Let me see if we can pull up another property so we can get an address on it. So as you guys saw, what we did there is we just used the GIS map to click on a property close to it because it didn't have an address, and then we'll kind of take us to where it's at. Wyatt at Northern Lights.
Is it? Oh, is it like a? Oh, it must be like a hotel.
I think it's more of it's apartment buildings
Oh, that's what it is. Yeah,
or condos or something like that.
yeah. Well, that should be pretty valuable property. Then it looks like. I mean, it looks like they could pretty easily extend and build there more.
Yeah, yeah, I'm sure. So it really is a great piece of land. You can see it goes all through here, all the way to the road there. Now you can see back here they were trying to sell it back in August 2025.
I wonder how much they're trying to get for it.
I don't know, but they didn't sell it in time. I can grab it and see. And maybe it sold, but I thought it didn't sell. What? Maybe it's under here. Yeah, see how it says 0?
Oh yeah.
So you see it was sold from the county to the county. So it didn't sell. So I mean, somebody could have bought in that piece of land for 88,000. You'd have to do a market value and see what it's worth. But it does look like a pretty usable piece of property. And based on the amount of apartments within here, you think that they have got to be renting these out. You can see all of the neighborhood up here has places. You've got neighborhood here, and you could build apartments there. You may be able to build residential homes, but definitely would be an interesting place to put up some apartments. You see apartments down here, more homes within this area. So there's a lot of building going on right around here, and probably has to do with some of the work that's coming within here. They even have an airport.
Hmm. Yeah, that does seem like a pretty valuable piece of property, to come up for auction there and to not sell. But then again, it's limited by who attends the sale there and who can bid on it.
Yeah, and we can see all kinds of different ones that are available, or that were available. I don't know what that one is. Look at some of the ones here within. Here's one for 15,000. Let's see what that one was.
Oh yeah, it looks like a nice little house.
Oh, it's a duplex.
Oh yeah, it is a duplex.
It is a seller's market there. Look at the medium home price, 295,000. Has been selling in 43 days for 98.7, almost 99% of their asking
Yeah,
price.
that's selling very quickly and for full price.
Yeah, that's a good market. Yeah, you can see 4-bedroom, probably 2 and 2.
Well, that's
Estimating at
interesting.
233.
That's a great tax sale with a lot of great properties in it for this county. This last county we've been looking at, this is Ward County?
Yeah. Well, and if we go back to look at one more thing before we're done, I've got to go back here. You can see right here where we can click on a list to see properties that are currently available for sale.
Oh wow, so this is oh yeah, there's that top property where we see the $88,000 lot. It's still there for the minimum price.
Yeah. So if somebody wanted, they could, go and pick up commercial property in an area that looks like it seems to be a pretty good market.
Look at that. They've got a property that has a minimum price of 1.2 million, and they've got another one that has a minimum price of 700,000. They have a couple of them. They actually have they have two of them. They have another one there that has a minimum price of 749,000 as well. Those are some big over the counter.
That's what it is.
Oh yeah, that looks like a nice big piece of usable property there. This is the one for
78
78.
acres.
This is the one for 1.2.
I think so. Yeah, per 1.2. So it's 78 acres. I wouldn't be
Oh
surprised if the other one's that one.
yeah, the other one's probably the one right next to it. I'll bet.
Yeah.
Yeah, 48 acres there. Yep. So those are those two. That's interesting. I wonder what the other 750 is.
I bet it's this one right here. We can look, but I almost guarantee it's that one that I just clicked on.
Oh, right down below. Oh, is that what you think it was? The one, I guess it is Highlands Ranch Third Edition. It's in the same area.
Yeah, the
Oh
one,
yeah.
the big one, this one's the one
Oh,
that's 1.2.
oh yeah. Yeah, yeah. It is. It's 48 acres. That is the other half of it.
Oh, it's up here.
Oh yeah. There's the 43. So all three of them are almost they're touching, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, in fact, they have a number of larger lots here. It looks like maybe homes in some of those that sold didn't sell, but some of the higher price stuff, starting at 19,000 and starting at 20,000, didn't end up getting bids.
That house is on the over-the-counter list.
I wonder if it had a fire or something. Maybe it's just boarded up.
They definitely boarded it up.
That's interesting though. For an over-the-counter list of properties that you can buy, that's not a bad list. I mean, at least we know that there's probably some potential with that first property. It's not cheap at 88,000, but it also has to have a value that's got to be
Well,
substantially more.
and some of these, if they're worth 250 or 300,000 redone, could be worth going in there and rehabbing it if you could pick it up for cheap enough.
Yeah.
But it is kind of interesting. You can see that these look probably a bunch of lots within a certain area.
It's a
And
big list. It's way bigger than I thought.
yeah, it's $700.
Are each one of those ones down there for 30,000 a piece? Those are all lots, aren't they? Oh, it's a
I think,
condo unit.
yeah, I don't know if it's a condo or, I mean, not sure if it's land or yeah, I think it's land.
Oh, yeah. It's
So
land.
undeveloped condos.
Yeah.
That's probably the reason those are sitting on there. But
Are
yeah,
those tied to the $88,000 property? I wonder.
no, they're in a different area. I mean, you can see that that's not in the same area.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, they developed these ones, but then whatever happened, they didn't, develop these. This is the contractor losing all of these essentially.
Yeah.
Not, but we'll check out one of these lots, and see if there's any decent, just regular land. I don't. This one you can kind of see there's a little bit of a road there, but there might be some here that could be worth picking up a couple of these together for $700 and having a buildable lot. You have to look a little bit more into it, but got an interesting sell. There's some over the counters there available as well, and that was just a couple. That was just a couple of the counties that I looked at. So it's definitely something to think about. Could be even worth going to the auction. I mean, we can pick up properties like some of these examples that we saw here on that list. Uh, Especially the auction list, they could definitely be worth going out to because some of them sold pretty close to minimum bid amounts.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like the bidding was that aggressive, and I've been impressed by the inventory. There've been decent houses there. There've been decent pieces of land. Some of this stuff is junk, like you're going to find in any tax sale, but the properties are not bad.
Yeah, yep, absolutely. So go ahead and take that back, Shay.
Yeah, yeah. Let me. All right. Well, let's do this here, and oh, that's another interesting question here. Is would they offer those properties up at the next auction if they're still over the counter?
I didn't see anywhere where it said that they did, but to be honest with you, I remember we had a couple of students years ago that were living there and bid there locally, but it's never been a place that we've traveled to or attended the auctions. So I don't believe so, but it's possible they could. Would probably have to look a little into it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, everybody kind of operates a little differently here. Now, for the training tip of the week, we're going to talk briefly here about the top 3 tax deed risks, or risks that tax deed investors face. And there are certain risks that we face with tax deeds that are kind of unique to tax deeds. That you don't really face even with other kinds of real estate. You don't necessarily face some of the same things you face with tax deeds. And part of the reason for that, and part of the reason we need to do so much research, is because when we buy the property, we buy a tax deed, we're buying the real estate, but we're also buying anything that is attached to the property or that could be attached to, things like liens or attributes. Let's say the property is not very desirable. That's something you need to figure out before you buy, not after. And so here are the top uh, here are the top risks we have right here.
Yeah, exactly. The top three things that we need to check for, and of course, there's going to be additional things within there, but these are the three main things, the three most important things. Making sure that it has use, essentially checking for any type of government issued liens, and then if we're buying structure, we need to know the condition of the property.
Yeah, in fact, let me just there we go. Uh, yeah, basically, the usability, government liens, and the condition of the structure. So let's talk about each one of these here, just briefly here. So usability on properties is a pretty big deal, especially when you're buying tax deeds. If you're buying tax deed land, you have to know whether it's usable or not before you buy, because ultimately that's what's going to affect its value. It's also what's going to affect your ability to sell the property. When we're dealing with something like a home, the usability of the property's already been established, and that's why the home is there. But before any kind of a structure is there, though, we have to make sure that it meets the minimum requirements there to make the property usable. And so, whenever we're dealing with land, it's an automatic thing that we have to check for to make sure the property is usable. Before if nothing has been built on it. Once something's built on it, then at least on that part of it, we know the property is usable for whatever its purpose is there, whether it's a home or whether it's some kind of other structure.
Yeah, exactly. And as we're bidding at other investors, with other investors at auctions, and we attend auctions, we see investors all the time make this mistake. They don't know if the land is usable and they assume that it is buildable, or they don't go out and get current photos of the property. And so if we buy a lot, even if it looks like it's a normal lot, it looks like the other lots within the area, if the city has changed their zoning since that time, and now instead of being 6,000 square feet to be a buildable lot, they require 7,000 square feet to be a buildable lot. Well, now you've essentially bought what's called a side lot. You really only have a couple of options. You have to hope that one of the neighbors may buy it, or somebody else may buy it and do some other use for it other than actually build and use it for what it was meant to, is to build a home on it eventually. And so whenever we're looking at land, we always check the zoning. In fact, we were working with one of our coaching students this week, and we were looking at some land, and we went directly to the city zoning. We looked at the zoning code, we looked at the zoning map, and we could determine if it was a buildable lot or not. It's an extra step that we need to go through, but it's a step that's going to save you thousands of dollars in the long run. Because if you buy one of those lots, and let's say that the bidding even got a little aggressive, and you ended up paying 15 or 20 or 30 cents on the dollar for this lot to find out that it isn't usable, well, you've just lost your money. Hopefully maybe the neighbor will be willing to buy it, but you've really limited who you could sell it to.
Yeah. Now, fortunately, determining usability is usually a black and white issue. It's something where the property either meets the requirements or it doesn't, and we can usually find those requirements pretty quickly once we have like the zoning or the ordinances listed out there. We can usually find what the zoning ordinances are. How the different districts or the different basically the different uh, types of zoning, I guess the zoning types they have. We can see what those are and what the requirements are for each one of those. And so it is something that we can avoid with just a little bit of research here when it comes to property usability, but there's lots of other risks that you face as a tax deed investor with not only land, but also, improved properties. So if we were to list, the main thing you got to watch out for is junk property or useless property or property that money pits. So landlocked properties are the first one on the list. They are an example there of a property that you can't use because they don't have legal access. Side lots, though, have the problem that Steve was talking about a minute ago of not meeting the required size for use. So therefore, they can't be built upon, and that limits what their value is. irregular shaped properties, some of the leftover properties. I mean, whenever a subdivision is planned out, there's always going to be pieces of property that are left over, extra pieces that are going to have some kind of a value attached to them, but it doesn't mean that they can be used for any real purpose. And if somebody's paying the property taxes on a piece of property like that, they may decide to stop paying it because what's the real world effect going to be? Nobody else can use the property for anything either. And so it doesn't really matter to them if they pay or if they let it go to, because nobody else is going to be able to come in and do something differently with the property. And so those types of properties end up getting cycled through the tax sale over and over again. If they get picked up at another sale later on, they'll end up probably getting foreclosed on again because the person's not going to be able to sell the property or make any money on it.
Yeah, well, in the items listed here, the risks listed here are the ones that kind of stand out. We can look on the GIS map. We can see if the property's landlocked. We can look and see if it looks wet. Then we're going to check and see, is it located within wetlands? Even look at some of the flood zones and see where it's located. Now, a lot of property may be in some type of flood zone, but there's going to be some that are going to be a lot more risky and properties that we're going to want to avoid than others. uh, you know, there could be easement properties. There's all of these types that are going to stand out to you. The real risk is some of those ones that look like it could be usable but isn't, and that's part of the reason that we're going to check into the zoning. But we see these kind of properties purchased all the time where they assume that it may be buildable. Sometimes they may even have a high value. Like I remember one property we were looking at in Florida that had a real high value, but it wasn't a buildable lot. And so even though it maybe said it was worth $60,000, it really wasn't worth $60,000 because you couldn't build on it. So as long as we're doing our due diligence or researching to make sure it's buildable, we're avoiding properties that stand out. And with all of the online tools that are available to us now, it makes it a lot easier. Sometimes we may not be able to see on a street view. Maybe they don't have a street view on a piece of property, but it looks like it could be on a hill or something like that. That's where we can get into the GIS maps and look at the topographical maps and see actually this property is located on a hill. In fact, it's so steep that it's not going to even be a usable or buildable lot, where we may not be able to see that if there is no street view available. So there's different tools that are available to us now that me and Shay didn't have when we first got started that can help us from avoiding bad pieces of land.
Yeah, in fact, it's much easier to identify, problematic properties today with all the different maps and features that we have, and it's usually by identifying, physical attributes that we see about the property that identify or help us weed out those properties first. And so, yeah, we're always looking for things that might signify that a property is going to be junk land or that it would be hard to get rid of, so we can avoid those properties. Now, a second risk, though, to tax deed investors is not just junk property, but it's also buying property that has other things attached to it, like government liens. Um, you know, most most liens attached to the property are wiped out in the judicial foreclosure that they go through. But the one thing that a judicial foreclosure is not going to wipe out is other liens that were issued against the property by another government entity. And if that's the case, those government liens basically survive that process. And if we buy the property, we can get stuck needing to pay those back. But like the other one before, there are tools that help us to find the information. And we can find if there are liens against a property, we can generally find those liens and figure out exactly how much they are, and figure out whether they're deal killers or not, whether they're going to, whether they disrupt the numbers to the point where we need to pass or move on.
Yeah, well, and most of this information is going to be available online. We have the tax assessor or the property appraiser's records where we can look into the details of it. We can look at the GIS maps. And then through the clerk or the recorder's office, depending on the state, we can look into the records, the land records, the court records, and find out, is there any of these government liens that can attach to the property? Now, there's a number of different liens that can attach. Now, one thing with these different types of liens is they actually have to use the property as collateral. So within that record, you'll be able to see the address of the property essentially acting as collateral. Now, with an IRS lien, a state lien, these are liens that we'll see occasionally, but most of the liens that you're going to come across are going to be some type of local city type lien. nuisance lien, a utility lien. These are the liens that you're going to see 9 times out of 10. Can there be an IRS lien? Yes. There's a process of getting that released. Can there be state liens? Yes. Medical liens. In fact, I can only think of Oklahoma, but there could be other states where medical liens, but usually those aren't going to stick to a property in most states. But those city liens, those are the ones that could add up, especially we were talking about buying a piece of land just before. Well, what if you bought a piece of land and there on that land there used to be a home and the city actually tore the home down and now there's a demolition lien on the property for 15 grand and the lot's only worth 15,000. That's where you can really get into yourself into a situation where you can lose money because of these government issued liens.
Yeah, we probably see 9 times out of 10, what we're looking at when we find liens are city issued liens. They're by far what we run into the most. And so it's what we're usually looking for. But if there's any kind of a lien issued against the property, we can find it. And the reason we can find it is because all liens have to be issued through the local courts. They have to be part of the legal documents. And so normally, if you were going to have a professional title company come up there and do research, for instance, getting like a professional title search, the reason why they're able to find those liens against the property is because they're going through those same records, and they're looking for any records that are attached to the property owner's name. And if there are liens that issued, then they're going to be issued against that property owner's name. So we can always find those liens, and then we can open up the liens and we can figure out if they're actually utilizing the property as collateral or not. And if they are against the property, which in some cases they are, then the issue is if we buy that lien, we're going to be responsible for. Sorry, if we buy that property, we'd be responsible for any liens that are against it, kind of like with the land and a demolition lien, which can absolutely destroy the numbers on a potential deal, if there is money like that is owed. I mean, sometimes liens are not a big deal. We've seen liens that are a couple $100 and they don't change the numbers of the deal, significantly. And there's something that we can live with. But we've also seen liens that were for huge amounts, we've seen liens for upwards of 50 or $100,000 before on lots. And just certainly things you wouldn't want to get yourself entangled with voluntarily. You're better off just leaving alone. But the main point, though, is that we can always hire or have a professional title search done. But most counties now are making these records available so that if you understand a few of the basics about the research that we're doing, you can find those liens on your own and do so accurately.
Yeah, in fact, when me and Shade first got started, this was back in the late 90s, there wasn't a lot of information. There was a couple of out of print books that we could get our hands on, and any of the information we did find said if you're going to buy a tax deed property, get a title search done. Well, as a real estate agent, I knew that title searches were going to be several $100s for each one of them. And we thought, how are we going to do title searches on 20 different properties or 30 different properties that we may be interested in? That doesn't make any sense if we're not going to actually be able to acquire the properties. And around that same time, I worked with an individual that was doing essentially a pre foreclosure strategy, which he called notice of defaults on mortgage foreclosure properties, where he was going and buying them. And he was going through the process of doing this research on his own down at the county courthouse. And so we started kind of learning how to be able to do that. How do we do our own research? And we developed our investor title search system. So when we first released our program back in 2006, 2007, we had our investor title search system created. Now, at that time, you maybe had a 50% chance, maybe even less than that, that you could do this on your own. Many times we had to say, well, we probably need to get a lien report done. That's going to be the cheapest way to do it. Some of them will do it for, 75 or $100. So let's wait till close to the auction day as possible, and we'll do it on just the properties we want to bid on. But now most of these counties have this information available online. So we can go through and we can do an investor title search on our own. We can see what liens are attached to the property. We can see any issues that arise. We can contact the city beforehand and see if we can work out a deal and find out from the city more information about it. If the city had to go out there several times and mow the grass or board up the property or anything like that that can be involved within a nuisance lien, they're probably going to have some records about it. And if we approach them explaining what we're looking to do, more times out of not, they're going to be willing to help us and give us a additional information that can help us make a more informed decision about buying the property.
Yeah. In fact, yeah, it's pretty rare now where I think where we can't find the information on the liens, where we can't pull those up and locate those. Um, yeah, in fact, we can pretty well locate. I mean, and it's the same is also true not just of liens against the property, but really we could find anything that's attached to the property. If there's mortgages against the property, we can find those as well. We can find anything that's attached if it's through the owner's name, and it's been done there through the courts, then we can find record of it, and figure out somewhat about what's going on here with different properties. Now I see a question there. If a person took out a, a lien via a government issued lien in order to qualify for a mortgage assistance program, will that lien carry over if the property was put up for auction? Uh, that sounds
I've
like
never
one of the
seen one.
liens. Yeah, I mean, at least I'm not sure what kind of lien. More like, is it like a mortgage lien kind of a thing? And if that exists, most of these properties that end up going to tax sale foreclosure don't end up having other liens against them because the other liens aren't protecting their interest. You don't really see that happen very often because most of these properties are owned outright, which is kind of why they get deep into the tax sale in the first place.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and if it was something like an IRS lien or something like that, or a mortgage type, they're going to try to avoid it going through foreclosure and try to take ownership by going through their own foreclosure. So it's not really something that I don't think I've ever seen that before as we've researched thousands of properties over the years. So the answer is I'm not 100% sure, but I've never seen it.
Yeah. Yeah, the third risk there for tax deed investors, and this is a big one, especially for new investors, and for the cheaper the property is too, the bigger risk this is. But it's the structure, the condition of the structure, or the structure's condition. This is a big factor here, and probably one of the biggest risks that investors face if they're trying to buy structured property, and that is because the cheapest structured properties tend to be the scariest ones as well, because one of the biggest risks that we face is properties that need more work and money invested into them than what they're actually really worth. So imagine one of these properties that's value limited at $60,000 or $70,000 that needs major work like a new roof, and new plumbing, and new electrical. You could probably do one of those things before you would be putting money into the property you may not be able to get back out of it. And that's what we've got to watch out for: money pits, or properties that just need more work, and are better off probably being torn down than trying to fix them up.
Yeah, Shade makes a good point. It really has to do with the property value. In fact, to kind of give you guys an example, we picked up a property last year at an auction for $1,700. Now, this property, was secure, but there was a little bit of fire damage inside, but that was minimal. And the property had a value after we get it rehabbed of about 140 to $150,000. So we are in the process of putting $40,000 into rehabbing the property. We're going to be into it for about 40 grand total, and it's going to sell for 140 to 150,000. So if that property was only worth $60,000 rehab, well, now we're in a situation where, I guess in that case we could still make 20 grand on it. But you can kind of see what I'm saying is we're looking at those lower value properties. We really got to make sure the condition is good, because let's say that we pay 10 grand for it and we put another 40 into it. Well, now, we're risking breaking even or making just a couple of $1,000 versus making $100,000 on it.
Yeah, I mean, the value of the property is ultimately what determines just what kind of condition is acceptable and what is too rough, to want to deal with and walk away from. The other thing is with tax sales, a lot of times we're dealing with properties after they've sat vacant for a time, or properties that have been sitting in limbo for a while. And that can be, in some cases, properties that have been sitting vacant and empty, which is never good for homes. And so yeah, we see a lot of really rough properties. And at the same time, there's also decent properties that are out there, but those rough properties are a major risk for us, and something that we've got to watch out for, especially considering the fact that we can't usually see inside the property to see what's going on. What's nice if you ever get a chance to participate with any of the Michigan sales or in the New York sales that they're providing interior images. In fact, some of the Minnesota stuff lately has been providing interior images as well. Um, just looking through that will give you an idea of why it's so important. To be able to, at least, I guess, it will help you see what you run into sometimes when you can get interior images of the properties. And some of the properties are nightmares. Some of the properties, are sitting in water and everything is basically is wet and the whole thing is about to collapse. And the outside of the property may look pretty good from the street. In other cases, the property, uh, may look kind of rough, but you get to the interior of it and you realize that everything is there and everything's dry and it's in pretty good shape and you see the property better than you did, from the images in the street. So yeah, not being able to see the inside of the property is kind of a big risk, and we have to account for that a bit as well, even with our bidding. So we'll bid a little under things when we can't get some of the information or when we're not sure about things. That we're always better off bidding less on the property and losing it if we can't get it for a good low price.
Yeah, well, and for those members, we talk about the 3 stages of due diligence. And in stage 1, that's where we're doing our online evaluation. We're looking at Google Maps, we're looking at street views, we're looking at GIS maps, we're looking at county record information. Once it goes through stage 1, then we get into stage 2, which is really about researching the title. What we just talked about, doing a lien search on the property, checking out the deed. Now, once it's gone through there, that's where we're going to get into stage 3 due diligence. And that's where, if it's a structured property, we need to do an on-site evaluation. Please don't, please don't, not do this. We have seen just too many mistakes. It's crazy when you go to an auction, and this is generally within big cities, where you have investors that are first-time investors, don't know what they're doing, and attend the auction, and you can tell that they've only done an online evaluation, and they're bidding on the property thinking it's still in the condition that it looked like when they looked it up on Zillow or Google Maps. And something has happened since that time that has completely changed the property. I mean, these 2 photos are less than a year apart. We're looking at the right photo. We can see that there's a car in the driveway. We can see that the light's on, that it's currently being occupied. And, within a year period of time, now we've got, boarded up windows. In fact, if you look at that photo even closer, that front window is open. Whenever we see properties that are vacant with open doors or windows, that's automatically a red flag for us, because we don't know what's been in that property, who's been accessing the property, and it's not secure. So I would rather see a home that looked pretty clean on the outside and was completely boarded up, and you can see that it's been professionally boarded up, than a home with broken out or open windows or doors.
Yeah, it's such a risk that we have to get current images of the property here before we bid. And not doing that is one of the bigger mistakes that you can make. It's why it's worth it, to pay somebody to go out there and to take images of a couple different properties for you, so you can avoid making that mistake because we just don't know. A property could burn down, and we would never know about it if we didn't send somebody by there to get photos of the property before we bid. And so uh, that's why we want to hire this out. Now, it's actually not too hard to find people that want to do this kind of work when you just post something like a classified listing, especially if you've done enough work to kind of work out how far they're going to be driving and what you can pay them. And the more organized you are, the easier it's going to be when you're working with somebody. And so you can hire this out, lots of different ways that you can pick somebody out that you want to find them. But this is also oftentimes kind of the first team member that you're bringing on. So sometimes it's worth it to find somebody you can use for more than one purpose. But yeah, it's usually one of the first people we hire though is somebody to go out there and drive past properties and get photos of the properties. And we use those photos ultimately, to establish condition on the property for our maximum bids. So it's crucial. And the information we get from those photos is what we rely on for our estimations. And so, um, but again, we've seen people bid without having those photos before in cases where, I mean, a tree falls on a house or, the house burns down. If you go to an auction there, you'll see people, most likely, if it's a live auction, you'll see people bidding on that like it's in good shape. And those are people that are trusting or relying on online information.
Yeah, well, and as our members know, we teach you how to be able to figure out the route and figure out how much time it's going to take. So when you do put a classified ad, you have an idea of how many miles they're going to drive, how long it's going to take. You're going to give them instructions on what you need done. So when you do have somebody contacting you back right there within the ad, we kind of explain exactly what it is that they need to do and exactly how much we're willing to pay them. And so as we provide that information, it's clear to them what needs to be done, and it's clear to them what we're willing to pay and about the time it's going to take. So, when we're talking about these risks, buying land that's not buildable, we're always going to check the zoning. Don't buy a building lot without checking the zoning. Don't buy land without checking the zoning. We, of course, need to research for any of those government issued liens. We don't want to be surprised. Now, the one thing about the overbid, and when we talk about overbid, that's the price that, or the amount of money that's over what the opening bid is. So if it opens at 10 and sells at 20, that overbid should go to pay some of those liens off. That's where the money should go first before it goes back to the property owner. So sometimes the overbid may help cover some of those liens, but it's important we find out what they are and what the total amount is, because we may be looking at a lien that could be 3 or 4 years old, and there may be penalties or interest. So you may be looking at a $700 lien that's actually, $1,800 because of different penalties that they've put over the last couple of years.
Oh,
And we'll also do on-site evaluations as well on any of the properties that we're looking at. If it's a structure, we're going to go ahead and make sure that we do that.
yeah, yeah. In fact, see, we have a few different questions here. I'll tell you what, we'll answer some of these questions here as we wrap up. I know that we've got a section here in just a minute where we'll go through and we'll see if we can answer some of those. Now, in terms of pre-auction review, we are going to look at Massachusetts, which has some sales that are coming up here.
Yeah, absolutely. So as far as Massachusetts, they're classified as a redemption deed state, but they also offer tax deeds as well. And there's really three different ways that they offer properties. First, they offer what's called a tax title property. And these are the redemption deed properties. They're sold with a 6-month redemption period, and they pay out an investor a 16% annual rate of return. And so that's going to be at 1.3% per month. And you, after that 6-month period, you can go ahead and start the foreclosure process. For properties that don't sell at the tax title property, they end up having what's called a tax collector deed sale. And so these properties are going to be offered without a redemption period, but you still need to go through the foreclosure process after buying the collector's deed. So in that case, you're still going to need to foreclose on it. There's not going to be the redemption period. You can start that foreclosure immediately, but you're still going to have to essentially kind of go through their version of the foreclosure. And then they have what's called a foreclosure auction. And these are essentially ones that didn't sell in the first two sales, and then the county will go ahead and foreclose on the property and offer it up as a normal tax deed after it goes through the local land court.
That is an interesting process that they have there. A little bit like I guess some of the other states, where you'll have one system that kind of bleeds into another, like Pennsylvania a little bit, in that way. But yeah, it sounds like starts off as a redemption deed, but ultimately, can turn into a regular tax deed, even post foreclosure as well.
Yeah, exactly. And so they're going to use premium bid. They're going to start at the lowest, the back taxes, and they're going to bid up in price. Now, one thing that's different about Massachusetts versus a lot of other states is the cities, the towns, they're the ones that handle the tax sales. So the county may have some tax sale if it's within county land, but most of the tax sales their property taxes come out locally. So the city is the one collecting the property taxes, and so they're the one that's going to be essentially offering up the property to sell. So that means that there's, hundreds of different cities and townships. I have to look up the exact number. We have a big list of them that are going to hold auctions versus just a county level. And so It makes it where cities may have an auction every single year. They may have one every couple of years if they don't have as many properties that they auction. So it's a little bit different that way, but there is some good opportunity there for investors that live there. One other thing to mention is that there are also going to be on-site auctions.
And let me get a couple of these pulled up here.
Yeah, in fact, we can look at that first one, kind of the first one.
This one?
Yeah. So a lot of these are some are handled by the city and the city attorney. There's many also that will use different local auction companies. So go ahead and pull up to that first one, the city of Pittsfield. This is an auction that's coming up on the 13th. And so they only have 2 properties that are available within the sale, but we'll go ahead and look at each one of them. It is nice that they do provide photos of it. And I think I saw
Yeah.
on some where they had interior photos as well on some of them.
Oh yeah, they've got interior images on this. That's pretty handy. We don't see that all the time. This is a nice property too. I mean, at least it's pretty much a usable house, just like it is right now. You
Yeah,
know, it needs
with some
carpet
carpet.
or flooring, but minimal. And we've got an address here on it as well. You know, it's the city of Pittsfield here. Not me to do that. Here we go. And I think we have some kind of image here of it. You know, their image is August of last year, 2025. It's kind of hidden, I guess, by that big bush right there.
Yeah, can you expand your screen so we can see it a little better? So you
Not
can
gonna give us a
you can
value anyway.
yeah, you can see they have the auction information. Sometimes you can look down and they'll give you an estimate down there below. But you can see that Redfin's value is about 238.
Yeah. Yeah, much. Yeah, that's not bad.
Yeah, so this will be an on-site auction. You'll be, there with local bidders. There's going to be a $10,000 deposit, and then they give you 30 days to close on it, which is nice, which means that you don't have to have you have to have the funds available, but you don't have to pay for it, on that day. They give you some time to get all that together.
And they also are selling this lot for 10,000. And maybe we can get a shot of it here. Yeah, I think it's back there, right?
Yeah, I was looking at some of the homes that were in the area, and there was some expensive homes around there. There were some
Yeah, I
million
could
dollar homes.
yeah, I could totally see that. It does look like it's a nice area.
So it's a pretty good sized lot. We just talked about being buildable. Even though we assume that it's buildable, we can see how much bigger it is than some of even the home lots next to it. We would go ahead and check and make sure that it is buildable, that everything looks good before bidding on it.
Oh, that's interesting. All right, let's pull up the next cell here.
In fact, go back to that same auction we were looking at, because there's a couple of past sales that have some interesting there. Not the Sullivan ones, that first one. And so you can see that this city is coming up here. Well, they don't have it, but they're going to have it coming up. And then let's look at the town of Spencer.
Oh, yeah, they sold a couple.
I thought that first property was really interesting. I mean, it's a church, but it's a cool looking building.
Yeah. Did they tell us how much it sold for?
No, we'd probably have to go to the county and figure out what it sold for there. But it also includes this big, huge building as well. That big building behind it. So I mean, it is a big project. I'm not quite sure. It might have sold for pretty cheap, and it probably cost some money to go ahead and restore it. But it is pretty unique.
Yeah, yeah, it is a pretty interesting property. They also sold these other lots. The lots actually look pretty nice.
Yeah, yeah. I looked at a couple of them. I think I looked at that one on Chester Street from a Google Street View.
Yeah, I mean that looks like a nice lot, and that looks like a nice lot too. Yeah, they don't say how much. No, I guess still they wanted a $10,000 deposit on these ones as well.
Yeah, a lot of them will have a $10,000 deposit.
Yeah, that's a great lot. The other one I thought was equally good. Looks like there's a big property right next to it.
Yeah, that last one was almost half an acre.
Oh, $2,500 deposit on this one. Yeah, that one's 0.67.
I think it has to do with how much the property is valued will depend on the deposit amount.
Yeah, it's 0.74 acre. Lots of good land in this, along with that property there. It's kind of an interesting sale.
Yeah, that last one, it looks like that it was, that last one is I think that's kind of an over the counter essentially. You've got to submit an offer on it. I think it's an old firehouse, but can't remember if I think that's what it said.
Interesting.
And then we can go back and look at the town of Clinton. Now this one was really interesting. I didn't have time to get into it today, but I want to find out what this sold for because this is
Yeah,
8
8
townhouse.
townhouses.
Yeah, and they even have interior photos.
Holy cow. I mean, and these are townhouses. I mean, it's newer air conditioning on all of them here. They've all got vinyl windows, so they can't be that old. They don't look like they're that old.
No, there's one that faces the front, and then the rest of them are face the back there. But the ones in the back all look like they were currently being lived in. As you scroll through, they had interior photos, and so what this must have been is somebody who built all of these as a development and essentially owned all of them, and then for whatever reason, you know, they ended up going to the tax sale. But
Holy cow. I
really
mean,
interesting.
8 of these units, each one of these units probably would rent out for at least like $1,500 a month, maybe more, maybe $2,000 a month, potentially more. I mean, and so that's quite a bit. You're talking about probably $15,000 to $20,000 of like monthly revenue,
Yeah, well, in this area, I think it'd even be more than that.
probably.
If they're 2 to 3 bedrooms, let's say they're 3 bedrooms each, couple of bathrooms.
$40,000 deposit, additional deposit due in 24 hours.
Yeah, click on the map real quick. Uh, yeah. So as you scroll in, you can kind of see the layout of them. There's that front one. And then there's the the other ones.
Yeah, you can see them right here. It's a pretty good little unit, pretty good little complex. There's enough parking for it. At least, it's not terrible with parking.
No.
But yeah, they're all similar there in size and got September 2025 image right next to this park. Yeah, those are awesome.
Yeah, go back to that listing one more time. And kind of go back from here. Go back one more. You can see some of these properties that sold over here on the right-hand side. Scroll down a little. They didn't have any of the addresses there, so we'd have to try to find the old records. But I looked at this Sterling Inn that sold for 600,000, and I've got a couple of links on that Google Doc that have information about it. I thought it was kind of interesting to look at it. Go up to the top. See where Sterling Inn. Click here, click.
Yeah, there's.
But it's kind of a historic building there. It had been around. You can look at some of the photos here. This was them talking about rezoning it. There's like 6 acres there as well. So I'm not quite sure what's happened since then, but and maybe it's on the this looking at the photos here, but they have all I looked up all these old photos where you see all these old cars. It's been kind of a big gathering place for quite a few years. I think they were looking at redoing a restaurant and a bar and a coffee shop and that kind of stuff in the bottom, and then upstairs they were going to make them all into apartments.
That's pretty cool.
But you do see kind of interesting properties that come up for sale, and something like this would take a lot of work. I think they were talking about between $1 to $1.5 million to redo everything and make it how they wanted. But if they put all apartments up there, you had a good restaurant. There's a lot of history there. A pretty interesting auction. So hopefully that gives you guys a little bit of idea of how Massachusetts works. They're going to be sold there on the city level. They're not always going to have massive lists. The bigger cities are going to have bigger lists than obviously the smaller towns, like the town of Spencer, for example. But um, definitely another area of the country where people are picking up, good deals, good opportunity, and being able to buy property for discounted prices.
All right, let me do this. All right, I think we actually had a couple of other questions here. Come in, let me just look. See, in Illinois, you can't even see the inside. How do you deal with that? Not being well, so that's a good question. How do you deal with not being able to see the inside of properties? And I don't know if there's a simple answer there in terms of, uh, we try to take what we can learn of it from the outside, is our best guess, but it does increase the risk. It increases the risk dramatically for structures if we can't get an idea of what's going on, with the inside of the property. There's no real way around that other than, so when we are dealing with that, if we can't see the inside, we definitely try to pay less. We try to err on the side of caution with our bidding so that if we're going to get it, we're going to get it for very low. So if there is something wrong, we can account for it, or we can afford to fix it up or pay for it. And so, yeah, a lot of times that's kind of how we treat it, is just by trying to get it for a cheaper price.
Yeah, I mean, really, that's kind of what we had to deal with the entire time. It's really kind of been more recently that some of these areas have started at interior photos. And so that's the reason it's important to pick it up at the right price so that if everything goes wrong, we're still going to be in a position where we can make money. Maybe we're not going to make as much as we wanted, but we're not going to lose money. And more often than not, we're going to have a deal that ends up working out with us having good profitability. But that's the reason I always say, in this case, we have to judge the book by the cover. We've got to look at the outside and see what's been redone, what kind of improvements are made. Does it look like it's secure? Does it look like the roof is holding up? Those are all going to be indications to help us make a good informed decision.
Yeah, most of the time, the outside of the property is kind of a reflection of what's going on the inside, and that usually holds true, but but not always. But really, if you're just getting started, you can focus or participate in those auctions that do provide photos, which is one way that you can simplify things a bit and make it easier for yourself so that you're dealing with that with those, because we do know the counties and the states, that are providing photos, and it looks like that number is growing, all the time. But a lot of times, some of those tax sales, it's just kind of how the tax sale's been conducted. It's not necessarily because they always want to provide less information. Lots of cases too, the county doesn't have access to the inside of the property yet, and so they can't provide photos. In some of the other places that we mentioned, like Michigan and New York, the county goes through the foreclosure before the auction, and I mean, so they, in many cases, they'll have access to the property, and if they don't have access to the inside, then they just can't get photos. But yeah, in most cases, though, or at least in a growing number of cases, they're starting to provide that. And so, yeah, if we can't get if we can't get interior images, though, we definitely proceed with much more caution, because we have to, uh, you know, we have to take, I guess we have to guess on a lot of things, which is obviously greater risk anytime we're guessing instead of knowing.
Yeah, yeah, I can see a question there that asks about, could we go to an auction if we don't have the funds to buy the property? Can we get financing after? Most of the time, that's not going to be available because most are going to require funds within 24 hours. In fact, when we go and bid at some auctions, we have to go during the auction and actually pay for the property. So, in a case like Massachusetts, where they give you 30 days, you're kind of risking it. Maybe if you had a hard money lender in place that's willing to loan you that you've already agreed to, but even then you're at the risk of them not being able to do it, and they essentially bar you from bidding at the auction. So with auctions, we're usually looking at cash. If we're trying to buy property, using hard money or financing or private money or anything like that, then we're usually going to be looking at the pre-foreclosure strategy, where we're buying the property from the owner before the auction, or in something like an REO, where it's a mortgage foreclosure that's gone to the auction, didn't sell, and now we can buy it directly from the bank. But most auctions are going to require payment pretty quickly, and so that kind of limits us from being able to get financing on it.
Yeah, but yeah, there are options. You could always partner with somebody that does have the capital there, to do it. That's one of the ways that you can try to get it done beforehand. But I really like the idea, though, that Steve just mentioned of maybe pursuing REOs or something like that, because you could do all of that with a hard money lender, and be able to work out a deal to get a property like that and have time to turn a property and make money on it. And all you could do all of that without having the money up front.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, we've had some great questions here. Let's just see here. Oh, and REOs. So REOs, what that means. Sorry, we just kind of went right through it here. I forget what it is. Uh, what it stands for, but basically they're bank foreclosures that have been offered at auction there initially. So in other words, whenever a property goes through foreclosure, by most laws, they have to go through a public auction, and that auction is usually conducted through the county, and or through a local government in any case. But when they get offered up through that initial auction, a lot of times we don't know things other than we know how much is owed on the property, in terms of like how much the mortgage amount was or the total bill. But a lot of times we won't know much aside from that. So sometimes properties will sell at those auctions, so and sometimes they don't. A lot of properties don't sell at the auction there initially. If they don't sell, they become an REO, which basically means they're bank-owned property. They're part of the bank inventory. And when it comes to buying those, you can usually get inspections done on those properties. It's more like a traditional real estate deal. The banks, it will end up turning those properties over to an agent, a specific agent that they'll have that will handle all of their REO properties, all their bank held properties. And so, But you can generally get those kinds of properties though for a pretty good discount. You can probably get them for, between 60 to 65% of value, maybe less, maybe a little bit more in some cases, but significantly discounted price. And the property is usually in better condition overall too, because they've had recent mortgages on them.
Yeah, REO stands for just real estate owned, which essentially just means it's the bank owned. The lender, the bank tried to sell it at the auction and didn't sell at the auction. Now they're stuck with it. So they're motivated to sell it because the longer they sit on it, really the more money that they're losing. And so that's where banks will sell them for even less than the loan amount sometimes so that they can get rid of it, write that off and essentially not be at risk of it losing any money on it. That or we contact the owner before and do a pre-foreclosure, which we can use hard money lending as well. So there is options out there that if you're limited on funds, you can still, be able to purchase property because, most of your hard money lenders, your private money lenders are just going to be loaning on not your credit. It's going to be based off of what the property is valued at, what the after repair valued at. And so most of them will lend up towards 75 to 80% of what the property is valued at. So if you pick it up at 50% of what the property is valued at, and let's say that it's going to take another 20% for you to rehab it, most hard money lenders are going to have no problem giving you the money because they know that their money is going to be protected because there's automatically equity in the property once you purchased it.
Yeah, yeah, they're using the property, the details of the property, and its value and attributes are what they're loaning the money on. So, uh, hard money lenders won't work with most auctions because you don't know if you're going to win the property or not. But outside of the auction, though, you can definitely work with hard money lenders, to get you properties there. Yeah, it's absolutely a way that you could get properties without having the cash on hand here to buy it up front. And you could make enough money, through doing a couple of deals like that, where you would have the money to buy, what you want.
Yeah, and it's not based on credit. It's not based on anything like that. It's just based on what is the property valued at and what are you buying it for. So, it's not like a traditional loan where they're going to be putting all of that into place. It's really about how much you're buying it for and what type of equity is automatically going to be involved in it. So it's definitely a good option for investors that are interested. It's part of the reason why we always talk about adding a pre-foreclosure strategy, as one of the three strategies that we're doing, because that gives us a chance to expand and be able to buy property where we're not just using our own funds for it.
Yeah, and no, the hard money loan would not be like qualifying like with a regular home purchase. No, it would be different. It would be more like the property is the star. And this, I mean, when you go to get a home purchase, everything is, I mean, some of it's about the property, but much of it is about you and about trying to qualify for it through credit. And then the property details are kind of on the side of that. With hard money lenders, the property details are the main feature. And that's why, again, they're not basing it off of your credit so much. They're basing it off of the property value and what they're willing to loan on that percentage wise on the property. And so again, if you can find a property you can pick up for that low, for a low percentage of value, you can probably get it picked up and also get the money to fix it up.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So we appreciate you guys attending with us, and we look forward to having you again back next week.
Yeah, and yeah, it is. It's on the value of the, well, yeah, it's on the value of the resale. They're willing to borrow on it because let's say if they borrow up to 70%, let's say, or 75% on a property, um, you know, the investment is secured because they essentially, the property is collateral there for for what they're borrowing, and so they don't have to worry about losing it. And if they're only borrowing out 75% of the value on it, then they're giving themselves some cushion there. And so, but they're also going to make money on it because again, it's going to cost you money to borrow the money. And if you're going to buy the property initially, it's going to take you some time to fix it up. And so, that hard money loan would basically be, to borrow that long enough to acquire the property, get it fixed up, and then, to get it sold. so that you can pay back, the hard money lenders. So obviously you want to try to do that in as short a time period as you can, but that's what they would make possible, is your ability to acquire the property and get it sold.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So let us know if there's any areas that you guys are interested in learning more about, states that you may be interested, and we may include that in an upcoming podcast.
Yeah. And let's see, can you resell it without fixing it up? Well, sure. Yeah, you could. I mean, you could bring the same deal to a hard money lender, to acquire the property here and turn around and sell it. Yeah, you could absolutely sell the property as is and pay off the hard money lender on it if you wanted as well, and make a profit on it. Yeah, you could. But the whole idea behind that is at least part of what they're giving you the ability to do is, yeah, to, if it has a better after repair value, it's to be able to get that full value out of it rather than needing to sell it there as is. That's usually something more you would do. Well, I guess investor money, you could do it with investor money just the same. But yeah, what they normally do though is to give time to fix it up and sell.
Yep.
And I'm interested in Washington State. Washington State, they have sales that happen. Oh, I'm thinking here. I know that they have earlier part of the year. I know that we see them throughout the year. I know we see them through January, February, and March. I'm not sure if they still have, some of the sales may still be going on in Washington. I haven't looked. Year.
It will have them in the auction calendar.
Oh, cool. All right. Well, thank you everybody for watching tonight, and we'll be back again here next week.
Yeah, thanks again, everyone.